You are listening to the Food for Thought podcast, where each episode is presented as an invitation for dialogue and self-reflection. I am your host, the real MaCoya. Thanks for tuning in. Bon appetit. Hey everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in today. On today's menu, we're going to be talking about letting go and letting God. When it comes to letting go and letting God, ultimately what we're saying is that, hey, trust God. Trust God in the unknown, trust God, trust that He's good, just trust Him completely. That's what we are saying ultimately when we say let go and let God. Hey, just trust God, right? But the thing is that sometimes we only trust God as far as we can understand Him. And if we can be honest, that's not very far, because God's ways are not our ways and His thoughts are not our thoughts. We're limited in our understanding of what God does and who He is. So if we're expecting to trust Him and understand Him, we are in for a rude awakening. Trusting God means that we let go of our understanding. We let go of our expectations and our timeline that we have imagined and concocted in our minds of how we want God to move in our lives. When we trust God, we have to surrender completely, not partially. Sometimes we find ourselves picking back up what we've put down because we don't understand what God is doing. We don't understand why we're still waiting. We don't understand why He's taken a left when He should have taken a right, or why He took a right when He should have kept straight. So in those moments where we don't understand God, we pick back up in doubt what we've planted in faith, and we find ourselves trying to figure it out or establish or create our own Ishmael. And the thing is that will you trust God completely? When you trust God completely, ultimately you surrender. You surrender your understanding and you say, you know what? Regardless of what God does, I know that He's good and His plans for me are good. But God is not limited. His goodness is not limited to our understanding of good. And that's a lot of times what gets us tripped up, because we expect God to move in a way that we understand. Well, God, this is the good thing to do. This is the right thing to do. So therefore, we expect God to do that. So when He does not begin to meet our expectations, we become discouraged. We feel that He's overlooked us or abandoned us. We feel like He is not good, that He is not a good Father, and that His plans for us are not good. But when we say that we're letting go and letting God, we say that we trust Him. We're saying that, hey, Lord, I know You to be good, and I know You to have that Your plans for me are good. So I'm going to trust You. Even though this doesn't look like what I planned or what I expected, I trust that, Lord, You're good and Your plans for me are good. We don't stray from that truth. But the thing is that anytime we're in a waiting season or a wilderness season, we begin to question the goodness of God. We wonder why we're going through what we're going through. We wonder why He has not removed the thorn from our lives as of yet. We wonder why we have to go through this at all. And we begin to question God's goodness. And we say, oh, surely He must not care about me, or He's not as good as I expected Him to be, because if He was good, He would have done it this way. But the reality is that God is good regardless of our circumstances. Our circumstances or His goodness is not predicated on the outcome of our circumstances. So if we only trust God based on what we expect Him to do, then really we're saying that we're trusting in a genie. We expect God to be a slave to our every wish and every command. And the reality is that's not true. God is not our servant. He is not, waiting around to do everything that we want Him to do, because we don't understand. We are very limited in our understanding. So if God was limited to our understanding, this world would not be able to turn around. The earth would not even turn on its axis anymore, because He would be limited to man's understanding. And boy, that would be a disaster, because our understanding is relative. It's relative to our experiences, our age, our gender, our upbringing. Like everything that we've ever experienced in our lives has cultivated us to who we are today. So that means that our understanding is based on everything that we've experienced, as well as our knowledge and the wisdom that we've been able to gain over the process of time. And guess what? That varies between so many different people. So if God was limited to man's understanding, what limitations that would be. We wouldn't be able to even grasp the limitations that would put on God. So the greatest thing that we can do for ourselves is to stand on that truth that God is good and His plans for us are good. because everything changes around us. Our circumstances change, our understanding changes, our desires change. But guess what? God is constant. He is constant in all of that. So what we're saying is that, Lord, even though you may do things in a different way, ultimately, your plan and your promise is the same. You have a plan and a hope for us. So even though you may not move as quickly as we want you to, or move in the manner that we've expected you to or desired you to, we can trust that you are still good and that your plans for us are good. And when we can hold on to that hope, we can rest and we can be okay. And we can really let go and let God and surrender ourselves completely to what God is doing in our lives right now. Can we be obedient to the assignment that God has called us to right now? We can only do that when we're focused and not distracted on the outcome or by the outcome. There's a promise, but there's also a process. Will we trust the process, knowing that the promise has not changed? And the promise is that God is good and his plans for us are good, because God has so many promises for our lives, but ultimately the one promise is the same, that he is good and that he has a plan for our lives. And even though that plan includes ups and downs, trials and tribulations, we can stand on the truth that those things are working in us and building character, perseverance, but also that it's working for our good. So ultimately, are we expecting God to prove himself by doing the good that we expect him to? We must realize that God's goodness is not limited to our understanding of good, and trust that his ways are not our ways, and that's probably a good thing. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Food for Thought. Please leave your comments below and be sure to subscribe.